When he left the kitchen, he almost walked headfirst into Avery's shoulder. The hybrid stood close to the wall on the right next to the door. A singular torch lit the dark corridor he was in and reflected strangely from his scales. The members of the kitchen unit had spent the last hour trying to cope with the absence of one of its quietest but definitely one of its most important members. He himself didn't say a word or bother to listen to Frederick stuttering his ideas for the new task share. Tiana was in such a shock she barely complained when she was chosen to do the early shifts on Monday and Wednesday. Sean kept very calm in comparison to anyone else and focused on comforting Josephine, who had broken down in sobs and practically soaked her beige dress in tears. Dew didn't know how to react. Yes, he claimed to vaguely know the person he had worked with for 4 years. Yes, he was shocked and disturbed by whatever had happened. But that was it. In the end, Charles was only another stranger who was damned to hang. As he recognized Avery, he automatically leaned his head against his friend's chest, to which he responded with a slight flinch but gave in, and stroked his light hair. "You need a moment?" the taller one asked softly. Dew shrugged. What options were there? He could just go to bed, of course. Whether he could actually fall asleep was a different problem. Charles was practically dead. He didn't know what had happened, but it must have been a misstep, so it could have been him. He could be in Charles' place. After a few seconds of silent consideration, Avery suggested, "Want to see the lake?" He did want to see the lake. To whatever Avery said next, Dew didn't fully pay attention to, something about the gate being closed. The part he understood was when he said that he might feel sick to the stomach when he would throw the two of them outside. Okay, maybe he didn't understand what exactly that meant. Whatever it was didn't seem important to him. Without any further warnings, Avery took his hands and pulled him forward so hastily it looked as if the torch was blown out by it. It became cold. His head was spinning, or maybe he was just spinning as a whole. Pink stars danced in front of his eyes as he lost balance and landed on all fours. To his surprise, he didn't feel the hard stone floor underneath his trembling palms, but wet grass. When he opened his eyes, a tiny pink flame was dancing in the darkness somewhere above his head. He in fact wanted to puke. "Sorry, I just recently figured this out," said Avery, who was standing in the dim light of the flame, and reached out his hand. "What in the world?" Dew saw the stars, real stars this time, and leafless branches of oak trees, and felt a chill breeze on his skin. He wasn't logically supposed to be outside. There was no shortcut from the corridor to a place out in the open surrounded by nature. Not so quickly, and especially not near the kitchen, which was his territory. He spun around his own axis to examine the shadowy environment, but couldn't make out a single wall. Then Dew turned to Avery, who was awkwardly standing there with the little light in his hands. Since when can you run at hyper speed? Or fly? Did you fly?" Avery smirked reservedly and explained, "I didn't run, it's just like—" He held out one fist and one palm, closed the palm and opened the fist. Then he continued, "I learned that about me a couple of months ago, and found it quite useful. Now follow me, dear friend, we still have to walk about 20 minutes. After receiving his blue cape, Dew followed his roommate and his light source through the woods. There was no proper path, so he had to watch out where to place his feet. Luckily his eyes quickly grew used to the lack of natural light, to a point where he could almost see clear. Maybe his eyes stayed similar as good as when he was at Merlin within a rather dark environment. Most of the wind was blocked by Avery, who was walking just in reach in front of him. They didn't speak a word, but the hybrid step was almost excited. He didn't lie when he was talking about the time. Shortly before they arrived, they came across a path made of dirt, which had been trampled flat by the people who must be regular visitors to the place. It split up into a road fork, and Dew guessed it was circling around the lake. The lake itself lacked the characteristics suggesting that it was all that big both in size and depth. "It's not what you're used to," Avery apologized. "Would I swear the water is pretty clear." "How's the ground?" "A bit muddy in some places, but mostly covered in round stones," he answered. Dew nodded and sat down at the side of the lake. The grass, dead and wet from the last rainfall, stung his hands when he sat on it. Perhaps in its rebirth in spring it would be soft and comfortable. It wasn't too different from the body of water he originated from. As Avery came next to him, the pink flame had vanished, and the only bit of light by the moon reflected in the rippling surface of the water. Dew took off his boots, which were still dirty from the trip he made to the forest with Charles only 5 days ago. It seemed unreal that said person was about to become nothing more than a name on a square piece of rock himself. Maybe not even that. Were you there when it happened? Du asked without looking. The death? I was in the room, yes, but I didn't see anything. Suddenly several guards on the front were running around and carrying the man out. Was there no announcement by the king or anything else? Avery thought for a moment before replying. His Majesty commanded everyone to calm down and told the servants to stop any further dishes from arriving. The guests were all pretty gone at that point, and the man that died wasn't anyone of great importance. Do you think they say it was an accident or a murder? He finally asked, as that question was what could determine whether Charles would actually meet his end the next day or not. I'd assume the latter to be more plausible, Avery admitted. Imagine someone in front of you takes one bite, bends over in cold sweat and vomits before passing away. And he's pretty suspicious. The confidence with which he made the statement made Du's face run hot. What do you mean by that? He hissed. His roommate was taken aback at the sudden shift in tone. I heard he had a history, and he's practically been giving up his life to make up for that, Du cut him off. Avery sighed. Maybe, but the poisoned one used to be the judge a couple of years ago, before retiring, and probably sentenced him and his family to death. Furthermore, another servant noticed that the plate wasn't even supposed to be put in front of that person, but the king instead. Du remembered. So he did it out of revenge. He couldn't believe it. Objectively, it made sense, but not to him. He knew Charles as a quiet and kind person who even felt sad when it came to removing the feathers from a lifeless chicken. In silence, he rolled up the legs of his trousers. He watched as the white tissue of old scars on his legs and feet were covered in water, as the sensation of the cool wet sent shivers across his skin. It had been so long since he last was outside this late. The oak branches and pine needles rustled as the wind moved through them. An owl hooted in the distance. It really wasn't all that different from home, actual home, where he could take a wrong step and still keep his head attached to his neck. Most of the time, at least. Avery covered him with one wing. I want to ask him if he really did do it, the Merling fantasized before turning towards the dragon hybrid and requesting, Could you help me see him? Tonight? He couldn't decipher what the expression on his face meant. That won't be possible, I'm afraid, he answered. No authority, I understand, but can you not just lie and say it's your shift? It's not that, Avery was searching for words. Do you not want me to? Du suspected. Of course not, I just don't know if there's anything left to see at this point. Du didn't understand. Where did they keep Charles so that no one could access him? Avery had always described the cells as being stone rooms with 3 walls and one side barricaded by iron bars. The knight must have figured out what he was thinking and explained in a muted voice. I was supposed to be at the trial tomorrow, but something unexpected happened. He wasn't locked up for long when the message was transmitted that he had taken care of his own execution. The water became unbearably cold. Du pulled his legs out and tucked them in between his arms and chin. What do you mean by that? He asked, even though he didn't want to know. He didn't want to know what lengths his ex-colleague had gone through to rapidly shorten his lifespan, what drastic and horrific ideas he had invented to even take his last possession from himself. A rope made from his shirt, Du still heard Avery's unbearable reply. His knees felt uncomfortably close to his neck, almost suffocating, but it was too cold for him to move. The servant wanted to speak, opened his mouth only for nothing to come out, and closed it again, only to attempt again, and finally say, Why would he do such a thing? He could have lived another night. But for what? Not everyone wants to solely live for the reason of living. Do you remember the scene from a long time ago? He was on the muddy ground, submerged by water, alone. The sun smiled on the surface, but he had his eyes closed and let the swirls mess with his white hair. That changed when the light suddenly disappeared and the surrounding water shook. He automatically hid behind the rock structure and stared upwards. A small black silhouette had broken through the surface and was slowly sinking to the ground while large bubbles emerged from its head. After a moment on consideration, his worry won and he swam towards it. With his hands under his shoulders, he dragged it back up. Submerged by fresh air, he placed the silhouette, which turned out to be a human boy, on land. The boy coughed out much water and gasped for oxygen. Then he sat down in exhaustion. Dew looked at him, and his vibrant pink eyes were looking back at him. To this day, he still couldn't understand why one would do something like this to themselves. Thinking back, if he hadn't made the decision to save the boy, he would probably still be a Merling somewhere in nowhere, or worse, a dish in someone's celebration. After a while, he asked to go back. He didn't feel like he could sleep, but the environment was starting to make him feel exposed. Just like before, they walked for 20 minutes before arriving at the point they had started. Then Dew found himself in the chamber that was supposed to be his home, but it was a cage. The royals could decide on how far their inhabitants could enjoy their freedom. He switched out his all-day clothes for a long beige shirt and pulled a blanket over his shivering body. Avery was searching through the chest in the corner before sitting down next to him. In his hand was a small pouch with irregular dents in its surface. "Are you planning to stay up for the night or sleep?" Avery asked. Dew shook his head and replied, "I probably can't do either." His roommate opened the pouch and took out a round object with string-like axes. "If you want to, you can take this. It fully knocks out a human for about an hour before sending them into a mild sleep if chewed," he explained to Root. Dew took it in between his fingertips and examined it. "Why do you have something like this? You can't even eat a bite without vomiting," he then genuinely asked. The hybrid cocked his head, looking at the pouch as if it was an uncomfortable memoir. "Some of my colleagues use them in a way I disagree with, so I took them before anyone else could." Dew understood. He took one more look at his friend as if there could be any intentions behind the offer. The very same moment he felt guilty. Everyone but him. Everyone but Avery would even think of anything heinous, even though others guessed so. He took a bite.